Erin J. Chararma was born as Erin J. Donald in 1976. She worked as a federal corrections officer at the Coleman Federal Correctional Complex in Florida. She carried a great deal of authority and responsibility. Everything changed in 2005, when she set in motion a dangerous plan that ended with an inmate's passing. Chararma was married to Rajesh Roger Chararma. He also worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They had one child together. On February 3, 2005, inmate Richard Allen Delano, serving time for selling illegal substances, reached through a food slot and grabbed Chararma's arm. She was left with bruises. In response, she told him, "You're a dead man." After that incident, Chararma and her supervisor, Michael Kennedy, made a plan. They arranged to move Delano into a cell with John McCullough. McCullough already had a reputation for hurting his cellmates. Witnesses said Chararma urged McCullough to harm Delano. She even told him to pick a day when she would not be on duty. On March 4, 2005, Chararma was off duty. That day, McCullough carried out the plan. He beat Delano so badly that Delano slipped into a coma. 13 days later, Delano did not recover and passed away. Chararma was charged with 2 felony counts, one for plotting to violate someone's civil rights, and another for using her power as an officer in a way that led to Delano's passing. On July 29, 2009, a federal jury in Orlando found her guilty on both counts. During the trial, prosecutors showed evidence that Chararma had planned the incident in advance and knew McCullough's record of aggressive behavior. The defense argued she never meant for Delano to lose his life. The jury did not accept that argument. On October 26, 2009, Chararma was sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole. She was also ordered to serve 3 years under supervision after any future release and to complete 75 hours of community service. The next inmate was new. The officer, already waiting. Christopher Walwrath was born in 1988. He resided in Oneida County, New York, and served as a state correction officer at Marcy Correctional Facility. On December 9, 2024, something terrible happened inside Marcy Correctional Facility in upstate New York. A group of officers treated inmate Robert Brooks very harshly. Brooks was 43 and serving a 12-year sentence for a serious conviction. He had just arrived at Marcy after a transfer from Mohawk Correctional. Body-worn cameras show that, while Brooks was handcuffed, officers struck him 3 times within minutes of his arrival. In the last recorded moment, one officer hit Brooks in the chest with a shoe. He then lifted Brooks by the neck and dropped him to the floor. Brooks passed away the next day from his injuries. Investigators charged 6 officers in connection with the inmate's passing. One of them was Christopher Walwrath, 36. On May 5, 2025, Walwrath admitted in Oneida County Court that he took part in those actions. He said he put Brooks in a chokehold, struck him, and then lied about it during the inquiry. Why would someone sworn to protect the rules break them so completely? This case didn't just reveal a single lapse in judgment. It pulled back the curtain on a broken system inside Marcy Correctional, a culture where power went unchecked, where some officers believed they could do anything and get away with it. Multiple staff members were involved, and from the very beginning, early reports didn't just miss the truth, they seemed designed to bury it. Under his plea deal, Walwrath faces up to 15 years behind bars. His formal sentencing is set for August 4, 2025. Until then, he remains free on bail. Brooks's family has said they support the agreement. For almost a decade, the next guard walked the same halls, unchecked. What came out next stunned even investigators. Gregory Rodriguez was born in 1968. He started working for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation in 1995. By 2010, he was assigned to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. This is the state's largest women's prison. Over time, he became well known there. He was in charge of supervising and caring for women in custody. In 2014, a woman under his supervision made the first report of his misconduct. She said he had abused his position to force her into unwanted intimate contact. Instead of investigating, the prison put her in isolation. They then moved her to another institution. This choice punished her and warned others not to speak up. Why did these actions go on for so long? The initial response set a bad example. By punishing the first victim, the prison discouraged anyone else from reporting similar cases. Also, the CDCR lacked clear checks to stop staff misconduct. Between 2014 and 2023, hundreds of reports of intimate harm by prison officers were filed in California's women's facilities. Yet very few officers ever lost their jobs. Rodriguez's method was to call women into private rooms. He often used parole board hearing areas where there were no cameras. He would promise small favors, like extra tobacco or gum, or threaten them with discipline. At least 22 women say he did this. 13 of them later became key to the legal case against him. How did he keep going for almost 10 years? The prison system never held him to account. Even after several complaints, he stayed on the job until August 2022. That is when investigators finally spoke with him, and he chose to retire. In May 2023, the Madera County District Attorney's Office charged him with 97 counts of intimate misconduct. The trial lasted 4 months. 13 current or former inmates gave testimony. On January 14, 2025, the jury found him responsible for 64 counts. These included non-consensual intimate acts and intimate battery. He was cleared of 21 counts, and the jury could not decide on the remaining 12. When the verdicts were read, Rodriguez held his head in his hands. He looked at family and friends in the courtroom and said, "I love you guys." He is set to be sentenced on April 17, 2025. He could spend more than 70 years in state prison. His case has led to calls for changes in how the CDCR handles staff misconduct. Advocacy groups say his actions were not just his own. They point to wider flaws in the system and urge reforms to protect people in custody. What happens when the person running a prison work program starts using power for something far more disturbing? Nikko Nunley was 48 when he served as a correctional officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. He supervised female inmates there. He grew up in Fairfield, California, but little else is publicly known about his family or private life. From March 2020 through November 2021, Nunley used his role in the Unicor call center program, where inmates handled telemarketing and customer service, to force at least 5 women into unwanted, inappropriate acts. He took advantage of his authority to pressure them and to punish anyone who tried to report what he was doing. A 2022 Associated Press report revealed a widespread culture of improper behavior and efforts to hide it at FCY Dublin. That report prompted a broader federal review of how the prison and its staff operated. In March 2024, Nunley admitted guilt in federal court. He agreed to a plea deal covering 4 counts of taking advantage of someone under his care, 5 counts of inappropriate touching, and 1 count of lying to investigators. His plea outlined both his own actions and the system failures that let them continue. On March 27, 2024, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers handed down the maximum sentence, 6 years in federal prison. For former correctional officer Nunley, it wasn't just a punishment. It was a public reckoning. The judge made it clear Nunley had abused his authority and punished those who dared to speak out. He became the 7th officer from FC1 Dublin to be sentenced for similar offenses, part of a growing pattern the justice system could no longer ignore. Nunley's case was just one piece of a much bigger crisis. FCY Dublin, once nicknamed the Club by both inmates and staff, not out of comfort, but corruption, had long been plagued by serious misconduct. But now, the shield of silence was cracking. Under mounting pressure, a federal judge appointed a special master to oversee the prison, calling it a dysfunctional mess, and directly blaming the Bureau of Prisons for failing to act on repeated warnings. The next guard risked everything for a little extra cash inside one of the country's toughest jails. Gizlane Berentos, born in 1988. She worked as a corrections officer at the Robert N. Dvorin complex on Rikers Island. In 2024, Berentos took part in a plan to bring banned items into Rikers Island. She worked with contacts linked to inmates to deliver illegal substances, including white snow, and extra food. In return, she received thousands of dollars. How did it work? But before we move on, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. Berentos and one contact, called CC1, arranged to get packages through a delivery service. On April 11th, 2024, they discussed sending a package. On April 15th, surveillance cameras recorded her entering an inmate's cell, but did not show what she did inside. 2 days later, a search uncovered paper sheets that tested positive for white snow. On April 24th, 2001, sent another package. That day, a substance-sniffing dog alerted officers to narcotics in her belongings. A search found about 10 sheets that tested positive for K2. Investigators then searched her car and found more sheets, plus about $2,466 in cash. After these discoveries, law enforcement interviewed Berentos. She claimed that no inmate ever asked her to bring in banned items. The case evidence proved this statement false. On October 2, 2024, Berentos was arrested. She faced 3 counts: planning to violate federal honest services rules, planning to share controlled substances, and making false statements. The first 2 counts each carried up to 20 years in prison. The false statement count carried up to 5 years. But despite the weight of the charges, her first court appearance told a different story. Berentos walked out of the courtroom on a $50,000 bond. No ankle monitor, no curfew, no home detention. Then, in a sharp turn just a few months later, she changed her plea. On January 8, 2025, she pleaded guilty. Not to all charges, but to a single count of federal program bribery. The maximum penalty, 5 years behind bars. Her sentencing was scheduled for April 16th. Why the sudden plea deal? The evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, substance tests, and seized cash. Together, they painted a clear picture. Clear enough that pleading guilty may have been her only real chance at mercy. The next individual wore the badge by day and crossed state lines with something far more dangerous by night. Leticia Rodriguez was 44 years old and worked as a corrections officer at Walla Walla State Penitentiary in Washington. She was in charge of keeping order and safety inside the prison. Yet behind her uniform and badge, Rodriguez took part in illegal actions that went directly against her duties. Her role in an illegal substance network came to light when federal agents uncovered a large-scale operation. That group moved high amounts of product through Washington, Arizona, and California. Rodriguez served as a courier. She carried both substances and large sums of cash between those states. To hide what they were doing, the group ran a real landscaping company as a front. We can only guess why a prison officer would risk everything for this network. She might have wanted quick money, faced pressure, or had connections. Her exact reasons have not been shared publicly. The DEA, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and local law enforcement joined forces to find her role. They arrested her at the Walla Walla State Penitentiary. That setting underlined how deep her betrayal went. In court, Rodriguez admitted she agreed to transport large quantities of illegal narcotics, including substances considered highly dangerous and lethal in even small amounts. On October 23, 2023, U.S. District Judge Mary K. Dimk gave her a 60-month sentence. That equals 5 years in federal prison. After serving that time, she will spend another 5 years under supervision. U.S. Attorney Vanessa R. Walwrath said, "Ms. Rodriguez broke the public's trust. Her actions harm the reputation that many law enforcement officers work hard to earn every day." Assistant Special Agent in Charge Ronald A. Diast of the DEA's Spokane office added, "This case shows how damaging the illegal substance trade has become for our communities. It makes our joint work with local, state, and federal partners even more critical." The next man had the keys, the privacy, and the power, and he used all three. John Bellhouse used to work as a correctional officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. He was a safety administrator. His job put him in close contact with female inmates. Between December 2019 and December 2020, he took advantage of that role to behave in ways that were both improper and against the rules with at least 2 women in his care. Bellhouse's actions did not happen by accident. He first showed one inmate special attention and called her his girlfriend. Over time, he touched her in ways that were not allowed. On 2 occasions, he engaged in intimate acts in the safety office. This was a room he controlled. In another case, he reached through a window to touch a different inmate. These actions formed a clear pattern over more than a year. Why did he betray the trust placed in him? It seems he mixed his power with personal desire. He gave inmates things they were not allowed to have, items like coffee, jewelry, and cleaning supplies. By doing this, he made the women feel they could not speak up. Getting caught with these items could lead to punishments for the inmates. The Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Office of the Inspector General looked into Bellhouse's behavior. In June 2023, the case went to court. A jury found him guilty on 5 counts. 2 counts involved improper intimate conduct. 3 counts involved unauthorized contact. The trial showed how deliberate his actions had been. On December 1st, 2023, U.S. District Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers gave Bellhouse a sentence of 63 months in federal prison. After that, he must spend 5 years under supervision. He also must pay a special assessment of $25,000. The judge said the punishment reflected how serious his misconduct was and how deeply he broke the trust of his position. Prosecutors noted that Bellhouse was the 8th FCY Dublin staff member charged with similar offenses. Bellhouse's case highlighted bigger problems at FCY Dublin. The facility had several staff misconduct cases. The FBI's wider investigation brought more attention to how the Bureau of Prisons handles these situations. How did Bellhouse use his position to carry out these acts? His role gave him direct access to inmates and control over parts of the prison. He could isolate women and act without being caught right away. What happens when a rookie officer trades his badge for fast cash and a box of secrets? Kenneth J Owen was just 18 when he took a job as a correctional officer at Buckingham Correctional Center in Dillwyn, Virginia. By the end of that same year, he was already caught up in a scheme that would follow him for the rest of his life. Owen partnered with an incarcerated individual named Michael Mao and an outside contact, Sathtra M. The plan was simple, but illegal. M mailed banned substances directly to Owen's home, along with $1,600 in digital payments. His job? Sneak the contraband into the prison and pass it to Mao, who then distributed it further behind bars. M managed the finances, funneling payments through Cash App, the same account she used to pay Owen. He used an alias, Carlos, to receive the money, then quickly transferred it to his personal bank account. By September 2024, Owen confessed to his role in the operation, both smuggling and hiding the payments. On February 11, 2025, he stood before U.S. District Court, Chief Judge F. Dennis Saylor IV, and was sentenced to 21 months in federal prison. After that, he'll spend 3 more years under supervised release. He wasn't the only one held accountable. Sathtra M., the woman who handled the mail and the money, was sentenced to 21 months in August 2024, also followed by 3 years of supervision. Michael Mao, the inmate who orchestrated the entire exchange from the inside, received the harshest sentence, over 10 years in prison, plus 4 years of supervision once he's released. What happens when a supervisor's shove ends with a broken inmate? Christopher Cluley had spent years working inside Isabella County Jail in Michigan. By April 2020, he was the supervising officer in charge of moving inmates from one cell to another. But that day, something went wrong. And it was all caught on camera. An inmate had just gotten into a verbal argument with another officer. What happened next was captured by security footage. Cluley grabbed the inmate, spun him around, and forced him hard against the cell door. Moments later, he pushed him into a nearby wall. But it didn't stop there. After escorting the inmate to a different cell, Cluley shoved him to the ground. The inmate cried out. Later, an X-ray revealed a fractured knee. Cluley was placed on paid leave as the incident came under review. The local sheriff's department referred the case to state police. And not long after, Michigan's Attorney General assigned it to the Public Integrity Unit. 4 years later, in April 2024, Cluley entered a no-contest plea. He was convicted of 1 count of serious physical misconduct and 1 count of willful neglect of duty. The sentence? 1 year probation. He also agreed to never work as a jail officer again in the state of Michigan. As part of his punishment, he must complete an anger management evaluation and take related classes. A broken knee, a fractured career, and a justice system still deciding what accountability should look like. Next, meet the officer who plotted an inmate's downfall over a pack of tobacco. Michael Kennedy worked as a corrections officer at the Federal Correctional Complex in Coleman, Florida. On February 28, 2005, he and another officer, Aaron Sharma, arranged to move inmate Richard Delano into the cell of John McCullough. McCullough was known for aggressive behavior. Kennedy and Sharma knew McCullough would likely harm Delano. They did this in revenge for an earlier fight between Delano and Sharma. Kennedy set up the transfer and offered McCullough a pack of tobacco in exchange for hurting Delano. 3 days later, McCullough struck Delano. Delano suffered serious injuries and passed away 13 days after the incident. In 2009, a federal grand jury brought charges against Kennedy for plotting to violate Delano's civil rights and for arranging for another inmate to harm him. The indictment said Kennedy and Sharma understood McCullough would likely carry out the plan. It also noted their motive was retaliation for Sharma's earlier altercation with Delano. Assistant U.S. Attorney Bruce Ambrose from the U.S. Attorney's Office and Trial. Attorney Douglas Kern from the Civil Rights Division handled the case. On July 8, 2010, a federal jury found Kennedy guilty on both counts. The jurors did not all agree that their actions directly led to Delano's passing. Kennedy was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. He also received 2 years of supervised release and 50 hours of community service. He appealed the court's decision to add extra time for targeting a vulnerable victim. On September 23, 2011, the 11th Circuit Court affirmed that part of the sentence. What led to the altercation between Delano and Sharma? Delano and Sharma clashed when Delano reached through his cell's food flap and grabbed Sharma's arm. Sharma ended up with bruises. That incident triggered the plan by Kennedy and Sharma to settle the score. Why was McCullough willing to harm Delano? McCullough was serving a life term and had a history of aggressive behavior. He agreed to hurt Delano for a pack of cigarettes. The offer of contraband and a chance to assert himself among other inmates motivated him. John Edward Bell was a 34-year-old security guard at the Pentagon. On March 7, 1998, he was alone in his guard shack. He held his .38 caliber handgun and fired it through a window. The bullet struck 38-year-old Kenneth Grant, who was walking nearby and had no home. Grant did not survive. Bell later admitted he was aiming the gun out the window with both hands when it went off by accident. He pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. He said, "I never intended to hurt anyone. It was truly an accident." During the trial, prosecutors questioned his version of events. They suggested he might have been handling the weapon carelessly. They also pointed out that he did not check on Grant after the shot. Bell stayed inside the shack until emergency responders arrived roughly 30 minutes later. On July 24, 1998, U.S. District Judge Claude M. Hilton sentenced Bell to 1 year in prison. He also received 3 years of probation. Bell was ordered to pay $3,135 in restitution to Grant's family. Grant's relatives were left with deep sadness and shock. His sister, Yvonne Scott, said, "He was never a threat to anyone. How Mr. Bell could cause a fatal injury and then stay at his post is hard to understand." The next individuals were locked up, defenseless, and following orders. So why did he target them anyway? Mohammed Shaheed Jenkins worked as a lieutenant and shift commander at the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. He spent over 20 years in law enforcement before he lost his job. On February 16, 2022, Jenkins harmed an inmate named Victor Russo. Russo was locked in a holding cell. He was not a threat. For about 5 minutes, Jenkins went into the cell again and again. He kicked and struck Russo. He also sprayed him with a chemical irritant. At one point, he even hit Russo with the spray can and a shoe. Afterward, Jenkins wrote an incident report. He left out any mention of the harm he did. He also gave a false location for Russo at the time. 9 days later, on February 25, 2022, Russo passed away. His passing has not been officially labeled a homicide. In another event on November 29, 2021, Jenkins used too much force on a different inmate. DH was handcuffed and following orders. Jenkins sprayed him with the same chemical irritant several times. He struck DH with the spray can again. He also slapped him on the head with an open hand. These actions broke DH's right to be safe from excessive force. No one knows exactly why Jenkins did these things. He was in charge as a shift commander. He was supposed to set a good example. Instead, he misused his power. He chose to harm inmates who could not defend themselves. Jenkins faced federal charges for violating civil rights and for covering up what he did. He admitted he used too much force on both inmates. He also admitted he lied in official reports. The charges said he willfully denied the inmates their right to be free from excessive force, and that he falsified reports. The U.S. Department of Justice called his actions a serious abuse of power and a breach of the inmates' civil rights. On December 19, 2023, Jenkins was sentenced to 87 months, 7 years and 3 months in federal prison. After that, he will have 3 years of supervised release. The judge noted the severity of his actions and made clear that officers who break civil rights will face real consequences. Jason Tagaloa was born in 1991. In December 2022, Jason Tagaloa was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. He had been a corrections officer at the Hawaii Community Correctional Center in Hilo, Hawaii. The sentence stemmed from his role in a 2015 incident involving inmate Chon Kaili. Tagaloa was about 31 at the time. On June 15, 2015, during a routine transfer, Kaili became frightened. Despite showing no aggression, he was taken to the ground in the recreation yard by Tagaloa and 3 other officers: Craig Pinckney, Jonathan Taum, and Jordan D'Amatos. For about 2 minutes, they struck and kicked him while he lay face down. Kaili suffered a broken nose, jaw, and eye socket. After the incident, the officers attempted to hide what had happened. They filed reports that omitted any mention of force. They met to coordinate their accounts and then gave false statements to Internal Affairs and the Disciplinary Board. In 2016, the Hawaii Department of Public Safety fired all 4 officers. Federal charges followed in June 2020, accusing them of violating Kaili's civil rights and obstructing justice. A 3-week trial in July 2022 ended with Tagaloa, Pinckney, and Taum found guilty. D'Amatos had already pleaded guilty in December 2020 and testified against the others. On December 5, 2022, Tagaloa received a 96-month prison term. He was also ordered to serve 3 years of supervised release and to pay a $300 special assessment. Marcus Bias was born in 1995. He was a former corrections officer in Washington, D.C. The incident happened on June 12, 2019. At the time, Bias forcefully pushed the person's head into a metal doorframe. The blow caused serious injuries that needed medical treatment. The person, referred to as JW, was handcuffed with his hands behind his back. He had been affected by pepper spray and was surrounded by 5 other officers. He was not fighting back or resisting in any way. Bias had been working for the D.C. Department of Corrections for about 1.5 years when this took place. Court records show that the incident happened while he was taking JW from the dining hall to the medical unit. Bias later wrote in a report that JW had pulled away and accidentally fell into the doorframe. But surveillance video showed something very different. The footage clearly showed Bias deliberately pushing JW's head into the metal doorframe without any clear reason. Bias was taken into custody in November 2022, but was released while waiting for trial. In March 2024, he admitted guilt to 1 count of violating someone's rights while acting in an official role. Judge Amy Berman Jackson sentenced him to 42 months in prison. After serving his sentence, he will also be under supervised release for 2 more years. Before the sentencing, Bias's lawyer submitted a statement saying that Bias regretted what he did. He admitted that he had made a serious mistake. His parents and leaders from his church also wrote letters to the court. They described Bias as a caring person and said that working in a jail was not the right fit for him. One pastor explained that Bias was the youngest officer at the facility and did not get proper training or support. JW has since passed away, but his passing was not related to the incident. This case shows how important it is to make sure that people in custody are treated fairly and that officers are held responsible for their actions.